Jonathan grew up in a small Midwest town where winter lasted too long and expectations were simple: work hard, don't complain, and handle your own problems. His father was a machinist who believed in measurable results, tight tolerances, clean cuts, no wasted motion. His mother worked nights as a nurse, coming home exhausted but steady, carrying the smell of antiseptic and coffee. He wasn't raised hostile to religion, just adjacent to it. Church was something neighbors did on Sundays, something teachers referenced in passing, something that hovered around holidays. Jonathan attended a few times as a kid, mostly out of routine, but the sermons never stuck. The explanation felt vague, the answers circular. Even as a teenager, he found himself irritated by phrases like, "just have faith." Faith, to him, sounded like a placeholder for missing data. In high school, he gravitated toward biology and anatomy. He liked the clarity of it: causes, effects, systems that could fail and, sometimes, be fixed. When a classmate collapsed during football practice one afternoon, it was Jonathan who stayed calm, who remembered the basics of airway and circulation while others froze. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but the feeling stayed with him long after: the sharp focus, the sense that in chaos, knowledge mattered. After graduation, college felt unnecessary and impractical. Instead, Jonathan enrolled in EMT training at a community college, later advancing to paramedic certification. By the early 2000s, he was working long shifts out of a modest station that served miles of rural land, highways, and aging factory towns. The job suited him. Emergencies didn't care what you believed, only what you knew and how fast you acted. Jonathan saw things that quietly reinforced his skepticism. He heard prayers whispered over wrecked bodies, watched family members plead with God while monitors flatlined. Sometimes people survived against the odds, sometimes they didn't. To Jonathan, the outcomes followed physiology and timing, not divine intervention. When coworkers spoke about miracles, he countered with statistics: survival rates, response times, trauma scores. He wasn't cruel about it, just blunt. He respected faith as a coping mechanism, a way people steadied themselves in the worst moments. In his opinion, it never changed the outcome. This particular night, his unit responded to a call at a small rural church. A middle-aged man had collapsed during a prayer meeting. When Jonathan arrived, the man had no pulse and wasn't breathing. They started CPR immediately. Defibrillation, airway support, nothing. After several minutes, well beyond what Jonathan was trained to consider survivable, the man still showed no signs of life. By protocol, they were approaching the point where resuscitation efforts would be stopped. Meanwhile, something unusual was happening around them. The church members weren't panicking. They weren't interfering. They stood quietly, some kneeling, some with hands raised, praying out loud, not hysterically, but calmly, asking God to return his breath. Jonathan remembers feeling irritated. To him, it felt pointless. Then, just as he was preparing to call time of death, the cardiac monitor spiked. The man gasped, not a reflex, a deep, intentional breath. Within seconds, a pulse returned, strong and steady. The man began breathing on his own. His color came back. He was conscious by the time they loaded him into the ambulance. Jonathan was stunned, but not convinced yet. Sometimes rare things happen. At the hospital, doctors ran tests, expecting catastrophic brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. Instead, scans were normal, no neurological deficits, no explanation consistent with the length of cardiac arrest. The man was discharged days later, fully functional. Weeks afterward, Jonathan requested the call report for his own peace of mind. He reviewed the timestamps again and again. He even asked a senior physician whether an undocumented pulse could have been missed. The doctor shook his head and said carefully, "Medically, this shouldn't have happened." That sentence haunted Jonathan. He didn't suddenly become religious. He didn't start going to church. But he said something cracked open that night, the certainty that everything could be explained. Years later, Jonathan said, "I didn't witness a miracle because I wanted to. I witnessed one while actively dismissing the idea. That's what makes it hard to ignore." He still calls himself cautious, still values science. But he no longer says miracles don't happen, only that some things happen outside our ability to account for them. And that moment, surrounded by praying strangers in a small church, changed the way he understood reality forever. This was a testimony centered on a skeptic, someone who did not believe, wasn't praying, and didn't want to be convinced. Yet he can firmly state, "I didn't believe in miracles until I saw one."